They came not from the skies, nor from the seas, but from the shadows beneath our cities. When the first reports reached Berlin in the autumn of 1939, no one believed them. The German command had other priorities. Poland had fallen, France was building its defenses, and Europe was preparing for war. But in the ruins along the Rhine, strange things began to happen. Farmers whispered about movement in the fields after midnight. Soldiers reported missing food, and in the mornings, steel ration crates were found torn open, with claw marks the size of a man's hand. At first, they laughed. Rats, they said. Just rats. But they were wrong. Terribly wrong. On the night of October 23, a German patrol vanished near Saarbrücken. When search teams arrived at dawn, all they found were broken rifles, crushed helmets, and deep bite marks scattered in the mud. One survivor, Lieutenant Karl Brenner, spoke of animals the size of dogs, moving together, hunting as one. His report was ignored. 2 weeks later, the same thing happened again, this time to a French outpost. Only one man survived, a trembling soldier named Lucien Morel. His eyes were empty when he said the words, they stood on 2 legs. Their eyes glowed red in the dark. By November, both sides realized something unnatural was happening. Entire supply depots were being emptied overnight. Trenches near riverbanks collapsed from tunneling beneath. Civilians abandoned towns, terrified by the scratching that echoed through their walls. Thousands of livestock were found dead, drained of blood, their bones picked clean. Still, the government stayed silent. Germany accused France of sabotage. France accused Germany of secret experiments. But at the front lines, soldiers knew the truth, they were fighting something not human. In December, the German army created a secret operation called Eisenfang, the Iron Fang. Their mission was to find and destroy whatever lurked beneath their feet. Flamethrowers were sent into sewers. Whole tunnels were flooded with burning fuel. But it didn't stop them. The creatures, now officially named Type R, were adapting. Their thick, oily fur resisted heat, and their coordination grew sharper. They attacked in organized groups, responding to signals, moving as if guided by intelligence. One intercepted French radio message described it perfectly: they build nests the size of bunkers. They drag the wounded underground. The tunnels go on forever. Then came the night of December 17th. The front near the Rhine fell silent. The ground began to shake. Soldiers looked around, confused, until the mud beneath their boots erupted. Thousands of giant rats burst through the trenches, charging like a black river of teeth and claws. Both sides, German and French, stopped firing at each other and turned their guns toward the swarm. Machine guns rattled, grenades thundered, and fire filled the night. When morning came, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Hundreds of soldiers were dead, their bodies dragged away into the earth. The rats had retreated, but not in defeat, they had taken their dead with them. Historians would later call that night the beginning of the Rat War. In January 1940, something unprecedented happened. German and French commanders met in secret near Basel. They agreed to a temporary truce. The enemy was no longer each other, but the swarm that lived beneath the soil. Together they formed new divisions, the Rattenjäger on the German side, and the Forces de Contre-Infestation on the French. Their mission: reclaim the tunnels and destroy the nests. What they found underground defied belief. Entire labyrinths stretched for kilometers, walls gnawed through solid stone. Bones piled high like monuments. In one chamber, a team found a mound of human skulls, arranged in perfect order. A French officer wrote that it looked like a cathedral built by something that understood death. Some soldiers swore they heard chittering that sounded like words. Scientists brought to the front studied the corpses. The rats were mutated: massive teeth, thick skin, regenerative tissue, and a strange hive-like intelligence. No one could explain it. Some whispered of biological experiments gone wrong, others of radiation or curses. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying: the creatures were evolving. As winter deepened, the infestation spread across Europe. The rats adapted to the cold, burrowing beneath frozen rivers, attacking isolated villages. Patrols found entire towns empty, doors broken, and trails of blood leading into the woods. The French began using mustard gas inside the tunnels. The Germans experimented with sound weapons meant to rupture the creatures' eardrums. Nothing worked. Every day, they came back stronger. By February, reports confirmed the infestation had reached Parisian catacombs and extended into southern Germany. The war of men was becoming a war of survival. Both governments classified every report. The public was told the winter had been harsh, that diseases had spread. But soldiers whispered of something else, something ancient. They called it Die Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. By March, the front grew quiet. Sightings stopped. Command believed it was over. Operations were scaled back. Units returned to their normal posts. But not everyone was convinced. The old tunnels still echoed at night. The air smelled of decay. And deep underground, in the damp dark of forgotten sewers, the rats were not gone. They were waiting. They were growing. They were not defeated. They were preparing. From that silence would come something far greater, something Europe was not ready to face. A new generation of the swarm, larger, stronger, no longer afraid of the light. As one German scientist wrote before disappearing without a trace, "We thought we were fighting vermin. But what if they were fighting back, as a nation?" By the spring of 1940, Europe stood at the edge of madness. The world above prepared for war, while beneath the ground, a darker conflict was already unfolding. The rats had vanished from the trenches, the scratching in the night had stopped, and many believed the threat was over. But those who had seen it knew better. They knew silence was not peace, it was preparation. The first new attacks began in the outskirts of Reims. Entire warehouses were emptied overnight, with walls chewed through concrete as if they were paper. French engineers discovered tunnels leading deep into the ground, perfectly carved, circular, smooth, almost mechanical. It was as if something had learned how to dig with purpose. Within days, the infestation had spread to neighboring villages. Civilians fled, and the army moved in, but wherever they went, the rats were already there, waiting, observing. Soldiers described the creatures differently now. They were no longer just large. They were enormous. Some said as big as wolves, their eyes bright yellow, their movements disturbingly coordinated. When they attacked, they didn't do it randomly, they targeted power lines, food storage, and communication posts. The war beneath the soil had evolved into something strategic. German reports from March described a horrifying encounter near Saarland. A train carrying munitions was found derailed in the middle of the night. The steel of the wheels had been chewed apart. No human could have done it. When investigators followed the tracks, they found the remains of the crew, dragged into a nearby tunnel, stripped of flesh. On the walls, in blood and dirt, someone had written a single word: "They're learning." As panic grew, both nations attempted to maintain secrecy. The world above continued its war of propaganda and tanks, while below, an unspoken alliance formed in the dark. German and French engineers began constructing sealed underground bunkers, giant steel chambers built to flood entire tunnel networks with burning oil. Yet each time they tried, the tunnels seemed to change direction, as if the creatures knew their plans. Maps became useless. Underground microphones picked up constant movement, patterns resembling coded signals. It was no longer a swarm, it was an army. By late April, intelligence divisions in both armies began analyzing captured specimens. In hidden laboratories beneath Strasbourg, doctors and scientists conducted studies that blurred the line between science and horror. The rats' bodies were unlike anything known. Their muscle fibers were dense like steel cords, their bones infused with trace metals. When dissected, the organs continued to pulse for several minutes after death. In one experiment, a severed limb twitched for over an hour, as if still alive. Some scientists believed the creatures were products of mutation, an ancient species awakened by years of warfare, chemical waste, and blood spilled into the soil. Others whispered that they were the result of human experiments gone wrong, biological weapons once designed to spread disease, now turned against their creators. Whatever the truth, it no longer mattered. They were here, and they were winning. In May 1940, reports confirmed the worst. The infestation had crossed borders. The Netherlands and Belgium began reporting disappearances near rural farmlands. In Amsterdam, a canal collapsed inward, swallowing boats and buildings alike. Witnesses claimed to see shapes moving in the water, hundreds of them, swimming against the current. A fisherman pulled from the wreckage described eyes glowing like lanterns beneath the surface. The press dismissed it as hysteria. But the military knew better. The German command initiated Operation Schwarzer Regen, Black Rain. The goal was simple: destroy every tunnel entrance found between the Rhine and the Ardennes. Villages were evacuated, forests set ablaze. For a moment, it seemed to work. Thousands of creatures were burned alive. Their screams echoed for me. Subterranean network, a vast underground world stretching from Paris to Prague. Efforts to flood the network failed. Explosives collapsed a few passages, but others appeared days later. The rats worked together, rebuilding, expanding, as if directed by a single mind. Some biologists proposed a theory that still chills historians today: hive intelligence. The idea that somewhere, deep below the surface, there was a central brain, a queen, or perhaps something worse, an intelligence born of thousands of connected minds, thinking as one. In August, the alliance between German and French forces began to crumble under pressure. Each blamed the other for failed operations. Supplies were running low, morale collapsing. Soldiers refused to enter tunnels. Some units began deserting, claiming they heard voices calling their names from the dark. One diary found near Verdun contained a single line repeated over and over: "They know me. They know my thoughts." By September, chaos spread. In Berlin, sewers were sealed. In Paris, entire districts were abandoned. Fires burned for days, consuming the lower parts of cities. Refugees filled the streets. Yet through it all, the official story remained the same: industrial collapse, disease, infrastructure failure. The truth was buried with the bodies. In the midst of the panic, a single transmission was intercepted by a German listening post near Frankfurt. The voice was faint, distorted by static, but the words were clear enough to freeze every man in the room. It said, "From that day, the war beneath the earth became a countdown." Engineers reported strange vibrations under cities. Subway tunnels collapsed without warning. One morning in late September, a railway platform in Paris cracked open like an egg. Witnesses described thousands of shapes pouring out of the dark, covering the walls, the ceilings, everything. The military sealed the area, flooded it with gas, and detonated explosives to bury it all. The CI, they are building upward. From that day, the war beneath the earth became a countdown. Engineers reported strange vibrations under cities. Subway tunnels collapsed without warning. One morning in late September, a railway platform in Paris cracked open like an egg. Witnesses described thousands of shapes pouring out of the dark, covering the walls, the ceilings, everything. The military sealed the area, flooded it with gas, and detonated explosives to bury it all. The city shook for hours. When the smoke cleared, the entire block had vanished. Despite the devastation, the creatures never stopped. Their numbers grew faster than they could be killed. By October 1940, both governments declared martial law across infected regions. Civilians were evacuated by the thousands. Roads were closed. And yet, the sounds beneath the ground never ceased: the constant scratching, the faint chittering, the low hum that felt almost like breathing. Scientists who remained in the field began noticing strange patterns in the attacks. The creatures no longer targeted only food or materials, they targeted specific infrastructure, radio towers, weapon factories, hospitals. It was as if they understood human systems, as if they wanted to break civilization itself. In early November, French officers discovered something beyond comprehension. During a night patrol in the ruins near Nancy, they stumbled upon a massive opening in the earth, an entrance wider than a church. Inside, the walls were covered in carvings, symbols, and markings resembling maps. They realized, with terror, that these weren't nests. They were cities. The rats had begun building their own civilization beneath Europe's feet. The soldiers who entered never came back. Only one man returned, delirious and blind. He spoke a single phrase before dying: "They are waiting for the winter." And so the world above carried on, blind to what was growing below. Nations fought for power, borders shifted, bombs fell from the skies. But deep underground, something else was forming, a new empire, born of darkness, teeth, and hunger. The war between men would continue for years. But in the shadows, another war had already been lost. They were no longer hiding. They were preparing for their rise. And when they would finally come to the surface, the world would remember the sound, the scratching that started it all. By the winter of 1940, Europe was dying. The ground no longer felt stable. Streets cracked open overnight, and from the holes came a sound the soldiers would never forget: the endless, chittering roar of teeth and hunger. The rats had come to the surface. The silence that had haunted the trenches for months was broken by the sound of scratching on the walls of cities. The rat war was no longer hidden beneath the soil. It was here, and it was everywhere. It began in the north. Villages near the French border simply disappeared. Entire towns were found abandoned, with doors hanging open and lamps still burning. Patrols reported seeing movement across the snow at night, dark shapes running in packs, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like mirrors. When morning came, the snow was red, and the bodies were gone. The German front line collapsed first. Near Saarbrücken, a base housing over 800 soldiers fell silent in one night. When reinforcements arrived, they found the gates torn apart and every structure inside hollowed out. The only thing left were claw marks and the smell of oil. The rats had learned to disable power generators, plunging entire regions into darkness before they attacked. French commanders ordered the evacuation of the eastern sectors, but by then, the infestation had already spread to the heart of the country. Paris, proud and shining, began to rot from below. Subways became tunnels of death. One night, a train never reached its destination. When workers entered the tunnel, they found the last carriage crushed from within, its windows smeared with blood. The rest of the train was gone, dragged backward into the dark. The tunnel behind it had collapsed, sealing whatever took it inside. In Berlin, panic took hold. Rumors spread that the rats were immune to bullets, that they could sense human fear. Civilians began sealing their basements with concrete, praying that the noise under their floors would stop. But it never did. The scratching continued, always beneath them, always closer. The cities above became fortresses of denial, while below, the empire of the swarm grew. By January 1941, coordinated attacks began across multiple fronts. Entire sections of railways and highways were destroyed in a single night. Communication lines went dead. Radio operators reported hearing interference that wasn't static but rhythm, repeating patterns that sounded almost like code. The rats were communicating across vast distances. The hive mind was no longer theory, it was fact. The Joint Command, now a desperate collaboration between remnants of the German and French armies, launched the largest countermeasure in human history, Operation Stonefall. It was meant to burn the tunnels beneath Paris, Berlin, and Brussels simultaneously. Thousands of gallons of fuel were pumped underground. At midnight, they ignited it all. For 7 hours, the world beneath Europe burned. Flames erupted from manholes and cracks in the ground, lighting the night sky like a second sun. For a brief moment, there was silence. People thought it was over. The air smelled of smoke and victory. But within days, the silence turned cold again. From the ashes came something worse. The bodies found near the burned tunnels were not rats anymore. They were something else, hairless, blackened creatures with limbs too long, skulls elongated, and eyes that no longer reflected light. They had adapted again. Fire was no longer a weapon against them. Panic became madness. Civilians turned on each other, blaming governments, soldiers, even scientists. Entire regions were evacuated. In France, more than 2 million people fled south. In Germany, towns were sealed behind iron barricades. Soldiers shot anything that moved at night. Yet nothing stopped the infestation. For every one they killed, 10 more emerged. In February, reports surfaced of the first organized surface attack. In the outskirts of Metz, survivors described hundreds of the creatures moving in formation, silent, disciplined, like trained soldiers. They overwhelmed defenses in minutes. A nearby observation balloon captured a few photographs before being brought down. The images showed something no one could explain, formations shaped like tactical lines, moving with precision, as if obeying commands. Scientists began to realize the unthinkable truth. The rats were evolving faster than nature should allow. Their intelligence was no longer animal. Some specimens showed signs of rudimentary tool use. They stacked debris, moved obstacles, even triggered traps deliberately. And in one case, a German field team discovered markings scratched into a concrete wall, symbols that resembled human letters. No one could decipher them, but one pattern repeated everywhere, a spiral of teeth. Governments began collapsing under the weight of secrecy. Propaganda could no longer hide what was happening. The skies were filled with smoke, and cities glowed with fire at night. In Paris, the last broadcast from the capital aired on a cold March morning. A trembling announcer's voice whispered the final words the world would hear from that city: "They are coming from below. If you can hear this, leave. Leave everything." Moments later, the signal cut to static. By April, human civilization in Central Europe was fractured. Major cities were abandoned. Armies retreated to the mountains, trying to regroup. In the Alps, survivors established hidden bunkers, cold, dark places where the remaining scientists and soldiers worked side by side. They called themselves the Keepers. Their mission was not to fight, but to survive, to preserve what little remained of humanity. Deep in those bunkers, experiments continued. Samples of captured creatures were studied. One report described a horrifying discovery: within the skulls of the larger ones were metallic fragments, small, organized, almost artificial structures. Some began to suspect that the swarm wasn't evolving naturally at all. Perhaps it had been engineered long ago, by someone or something unknown. Perhaps the rats were not nature's mistake, but mankind's punishment. As months passed, the earth itself began to change. Rivers turned black with decay. Crops failed. The air smelled of sulfur and iron. The sun rarely broke through the smoke. Those who survived spoke of strange tremors, a constant, low vibration in the ground, as if something massive was moving beneath the crust. One night in May, the tremors stopped. For the first time in months, there was silence. Survivors came out of their bunkers to see a sky choked with ash, yet eerily calm. Then, from the horizon, a new sound emerged, a deep, rhythmic pounding, like drums echoing through the soil. It wasn't random. It was a march. From the ruins of cities, from cracks in the roads, from tunnels long thought destroyed, they came. Not hundreds, not thousands, millions. Rivers of flesh and claws surged through the remains of civilization. Streets turned into oceans of movement. The swarm had finally risen in full. Flamethrowers, bombs, tanks, nothing stopped them. Every weapon failed. The ground itself belonged to them now. The last radio transmissions from the European command were short and hopeless. One voice repeated over and over, "We are losing the surface. We are losing the light." In the chaos, an old German scientist who had studied the swarm from the beginning recorded one final note before his lab was overrun. His voice trembled as he spoke into the recorder, "They are not animals. They are evolution itself. We opened the door, and they walked through it." As night fell, Europe disappeared beneath its own soil. The once mighty cities, Paris, Berlin, Brussels, became hollow shells, echoing with the sound of movement below. The rat empire had risen. Humanity had fallen silent. And yet, far away, beyond the smoke and fire, in the frozen mountains of Switzerland, a small group of survivors gathered in the dark. They listened to the earth, to the faint, distant hum beneath their feet. One soldier whispered, "It's not over." Another replied, "No. It's only beginning." The world above was gone. The war for the surface had begun. The winter of 1941 came colder than any before. Snow buried the ruined towns, and beneath that white silence, something ancient stirred. The truce between Germany and France had long dissolved, but their shared fear never faded. Deep underground, where light had never touched, the rats were building. When the first reconnaissance drones, primitive mechanical crawlers sent through the tunnels, returned nothing but static, command dismissed it as a malfunction. Then came the sounds. Vibrations picked up by seismic monitors beneath Strasbourg. Not random movement, but rhythm. Patterns. Like the pounding of drums from beneath the earth. Entire platoons were sent down again, this time with flamethrowers, canisters of chlorine gas, and thick iron doors behind them. None returned. The only trace they left were scratches on the stone, desperate messages carved by shaking hands. One read, "They are listening. They learn." By spring, the tunnels had reached the basements of entire cities. In Paris, the catacombs trembled. In Berlin, food stores vanished overnight. Civilians began hearing scratching behind walls, beneath floorboards, even inside hospitals. A doctor at Cherite wrote in his journal, "They come for the sick first. The weak. It's as if they can smell death." Then came the night of May 12th, the night of screams. Thousands of rats poured from the underground into the streets of Reims, moving like a living wave. They didn't scatter, they advanced in formation. Soldiers fired from rooftops, machine guns cutting through their ranks, but for every one that fell, 10 replaced it. Flames turned the night orange. Mothers fled with children in their arms. By dawn, Reims was gone. The entire city reduced to silence and bones. Panic spread faster than orders. Germany closed its borders, France sealed entire regions. Britain sent bombers to firebomb the French countryside, claiming it was to stop the spread of infection. But infection was not the right word. This was conquest. In the captured tunnels, soldiers began finding structures, arches, chambers, carved pillars made from compacted bone. The rats had built cities. They used the skeletons of the dead as architecture. And within these twisted halls, there were symbols burned into the walls, circles, and markings arranged like language. They were communicating that a German biologist named Dr. Albrecht Weiss discovered something worse: the swarm was changing faster than nature allowed. Their DNA carried fragments of human code. Some had human-like hands. Others stood upright for longer, balancing on hind legs. It was as if evolution itself had accelerated, 1,000 years of change in a single generation. "This is not natural selection," he wrote. "It's intention." Rumors spread that the rats had a leader, a queen. A colossal creature, nearly 3 meters long, intelligent beyond measure. Soldiers swore they saw her once, deep beneath lion, eyes glowing gold, surrounded by thousands of smaller rats kneeling in silence. She didn't move to attack. She only watched. When the report reached Berlin, it was sealed instantly. The Führer dismissed it as hysteria. But his generals were not so sure. Operation Nachtbringer was born, a full-scale attempt to collapse the underground world once and for all. Explosives were placed along every major tunnel system from the Alps to Normandy. The plan was simple: bury them alive. On August 4, the detonations began. Mountains shook. Rivers changed course. Towns cracked open as the underground burned. For 3 days, the sky was filled with black smoke. Command celebrated. They thought it was over. But on the 4th night, the ground began to pulse again. A deep, steady vibration, like breathing. The explosions had not killed them, they had only awakened something deeper. The seismic readings went off the charts. Beneath Europe, a vast hollow space was discovered, older than any tunnel, stretching beneath the continent like veins of a buried beast. And from that abyss came sound, not screeches, not scratching, but a low, resonant hum, almost like chanting. The same pattern recorded weeks before, now amplified 100-fold. It spread through the ground, vibrating through concrete and steel, felt in every chest, every bone. Radios crackled with whispers. Animals fled the forests. Compasses spun endlessly. The rats were no longer hiding. They were calling. All across Europe, cities fell dark as the swarm surged upward again, millions upon millions, moving not as individuals, but as one colossal organism. The night skies filled with the smell of smoke and iron. The ground cracked open, releasing heat like from the lungs of the earth. In Berlin, survivors described what they saw before the signal was lost: a sea of movement swallowing the city, the sound of gunfire fading beneath waves of teeth and fur. The world beneath, one soldier whispered before the radio cut, has decided to reclaim the world above. And in that moment, mankind realized that the war of nations was meaningless. The real war had always been below their feet. The Rat War had entered its final phase. The final year of the Rat War began not with gunfire, but with silence. Cities that once roared with life now stood empty, windows shattered, streets buried beneath ash and bone. Europe had become a graveyard of echoes. Those who survived spoke in whispers, afraid that even the sound of breath might draw what still moved beneath the ground. The armies of men were gone. Governments no longer issued orders. Radios played only static. Yet deep in the Alps, one last human stronghold remained, a hidden facility known as Bastion 9. Within its cold steel walls, the last scientists and soldiers gathered to make one final attempt. They called it Project Exodus. Their plan was desperate: unleash a massive electromagnetic pulse beneath the continent to collapse every tunnel, to burn out whatever intelligence guided the swarm. It was a weapon built not to win, but to end. For weeks, they worked in darkness, scavenging parts, feeding on stale rations, listening to the scratching that grew louder every night. The walls trembled. The power of the swarm was growing. They knew time was running out. On the night of February 3, 1943, the generators were ready. Hundreds of kilometers of underground wiring connected to the heart of Europe. The last message transmitted from Bastion 9 was brief: "We light the earth." Then silence. What followed was not seen by human eyes. The ground split open. Mountains collapsed inward. Rivers boiled as energy ripped through the soil. For a moment, the world itself seemed to scream. And then, nothing. For days, smoke covered the sky. When it cleared, there were no more swarms. No more movement beneath the ground. The scratching had stopped. Humanity believed it had finally won. But victory was hollow. The blast had scorched the land, poisoned the air, and erased everything it touched. Entire regions vanished from maps. Survivors wandered through cities that no longer had names, searching for voices that would never answer again. Months later, a reconnaissance team sent from Britain reached the ruins of Bastion 9. There were no bodies. Only a single recording device, still running on backup power. The voice on it was faint, distorted by static, but the words were clear. They didn't die. They moved deeper. The earth is not ours anymore. The transmission ended with a sound, low, rhythmic, familiar. The same hum recorded years before. It pulsed beneath the static, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Decades passed. Nature returned to the ruins. Forests grew over cities. Rivers reclaimed the roads. Humanity rebuilt what it could, telling stories of the rat war as myth, as madness born from wartime fear. But sometimes, when the wind blows through the broken cathedrals of Europe, people still hear something beneath the ground. A faint, synchronized vibration. In the deepest parts of the world, where light has never reached, tunnels still exist. Bones still mark the walls like forgotten prayers. And somewhere far below, in the blackness of the earth, a single sound echoes through the hollow veins of stone, soft, patient, and eternal. The hum of the swarm. Still waiting. Still growing. Still remembering the world that tried to bury them.